The federal courthouse buzzed with morning activity as people filled the wooden benches. Amy Clark sat alone in the front row, her fingers gripping a worn laptop bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her thick glasses kept sliding down her nose, and she pushed them up every few seconds. At 22, she looked even younger in her oversized blazer that clearly belonged to someone else. Judge Harold Bennett entered the courtroom with his usual air of authority. At 64, he had been on the bench for nearly 30 years and believed he had seen every type of criminal and troublemaker. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and his black robes made him look imposing as he took his seat behind the tall wooden desk. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Bennett," called the bailiff. Everyone stood, including Amy, who nearly dropped her laptop bag. She caught it just in time, earning a few snickers from people in the gallery. Judge Bennett noticed the commotion and frowned. "Case number 2087, the United States versus Amy Marie Clark," announced the court clerk. Amy walked forward on shaky legs. She had never been in a courtroom before, and everything felt overwhelming. The ceiling seemed too high, the walls too formal, and all the eyes watching her too judgmental. "Miss Clark," Judge Bennett said, looking down at her with obvious displeasure. "I see here you've chosen to represent yourself. That's usually not a wise decision, especially for someone facing serious federal charges." "Yes, Your Honor," Amy said quietly. "I couldn't afford a lawyer." Judge Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Well, I suppose we'll see how that works out for you." He shuffled through the papers on his desk. "You're charged with unauthorized access to government computer systems, specifically NASA databases. Do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" "I do, Your Honor, but I need to explain." "You'll have your chance to speak," Judge Bennett cut her off. "First, let's hear from the prosecution." District Attorney Lisa Morgan stood up from the prosecutor's table. She was a sharp woman in her 40s with short brown hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She had prosecuted dozens of computer crimes and considered this case routine. "Your Honor, the defendant hacked into NASA computer systems on multiple occasions over the past 3 months. She bypassed security protocols, accessed classified information, and caused significant disruption to NASA operations. We have digital evidence showing her computer's IP address connected to NASA servers at least 47 times. Amy shifted nervously in her seat. She wanted to interrupt, to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, but she knew she had to. Wait her turn. "The government believes this was an act of cyber terrorism," continued D.A. Morgan. "Miss Clark showed a complete disregard for national security and federal law. We're seeking the maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison." Judge Bennett nodded seriously. "Thank you, Counselor. Miss Clark, you may now present your defense." Amy stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, and her voice came out as barely, more than a whisper. "Your Honor, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to help." "Speak up," Judge Bennett said impatiently. "The court reporter needs to hear you." Amy cleared her throat and tried again, slightly louder. "I said I was trying to help. I found something important and I needed to warn NASA about it." Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair with a skeptical expression. "Warn them about what exactly?" "About the signals I detected. The patterns that showed something was coming to Earth." Several people in the gallery whispered to each other. Judge Bennett held up his hand for silence, then looked back at Amy, with amusement in his eyes. "Signals? What kind of signals?" he asked, clearly not taking her seriously. "Mathematical sequences embedded in radio waves from space. They weren't random. They were structured, like a countdown or coordinates. I tried to contact NASA through normal channels, but nobody would listen to me." Judge Bennett actually chuckled. "So you decided to hack into government computers because you thought you found some space signals? Miss Clark, do you realize how that sounds?" Amy's face turned red. "I know it sounds strange, but the math doesn't lie. The patterns are too complex to be natural phenomena." "The math doesn't lie," Judge Bennett repeated mockingly. "Young lady, I think you've been watching too many science fiction movies. Playing video games and reading comic books isn't the same as understanding real science." "I have a master's degree in quantum cryptography from MIT, Amy said, her voice getting slightly stronger. "I'm working on my doctorate in applied mathematics." "Oh, well then," Judge Bennett said with exaggerated surprise. "A master's degree. I suppose that makes you an expert on alien communications now? The people in the gallery laughed, and Amy felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had expected skepticism, but not outright mockery from a federal judge. Your Honor, with respect, you don't understand what I found. What I understand, Miss Clark, is that a young woman who spent too much time on her computer decided she knew better than the entire United States government. Maybe if you had spent less time playing around with computers and more time learning respect for authority, you wouldn't be standing in my courtroom today. Amy clenched her fists. I'm not some kid playing games. I detected genuine extraterrestrial communications, and I was trying to save lives. Judge Bennett laughed out loud. Extraterrestrial communications? What's next? Are you going to tell me that little green men are coming to invade Earth? Miss Clark, this is a federal courtroom, not a comic book convention. The beings aren't little or green, Amy said quietly. And they're not coming to invade. They're coming to test us. The laughter in the courtroom died down as people tried to figure out if Amy was serious or mentally ill. Judge Bennett's amusement turned to irritation. Miss Clark, if you think making up fairy tales about space aliens is going to help your case, you're sadly mistaken. This court deals in facts and evidence, not fantasy stories. Amy looked down at her laptop bag, then back up at Judge Bennett. She had tried to do this the easy way through proper channels, but nobody would listen. Now she was being humiliated in front of a room full of strangers who thought she was either crazy or stupid. Your Honor, she said, her voice barely audible, I wasn't hacking NASA to steal anything. I was trying to warn them about something that's going to happen very soon. And what exactly is going to happen? Judge Bennett asked with mock patience. Amy looked directly at him, her eyes serious behind her thick glasses. At exactly 2:47 this afternoon, an electromagnetic pulse from an approaching alien probe will cause a brief power fluctuation in this building. The lights will flicker for exactly 3 seconds. Judge Bennett stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing again. Oh, wonderful. Now you're making predictions. Tell me, Miss Clark, do you also read palms and crystal balls? Amy didn't respond to the joke. Instead, she said something that made the entire courtroom fall silent. No, Your Honor, I'm just someone who knows how to read alien mathematics. The courtroom remained dead silent after Amy's words about alien mathematics. Judge Bennett's smile faded slowly as he stared at the young woman standing before him. He had expected her to break down or admit she was lying, but Amy stood perfectly, still, waiting for his response. Alien mathematics. Judge Bennett repeated slowly. Miss Clark, I think you need psychiatric evaluation more than legal representation. Amy didn't flinch. Your Honor, 3 months ago I was working on my doctoral thesis when I detected unusual signal patterns coming from deep space. Most people dismiss them as cosmic background noise, but I recognized something different about them. And what exactly did you recognize? D.A. Morgan asked, standing up from her table. She was curious despite herself. Mathematical sequences that follow principles we don't use on Earth. The signals contained coordinates, distance measurements, and countdown timers, all written in a base 16 mathematical system that uses dimensional relationships we barely understand. Judge Bennett rubbed his forehead. Miss Clark, even if I believed any of this nonsense, which I don't, how does that justify breaking federal law? Amy opened her laptop bag and pulled out a thick folder full of printed papers covered in complex equations and diagrams. Because the countdown timer shows that first contact will happen today, and nobody at NASA would listen to me when I tried to warn them through normal channels. First contact, Judge Bennett said flatly. You mean meeting aliens? Yes, Your Honor. The beings who sent these signals aren't hostile, but they're not just visiting either. Based on the mathematical patterns, they're here to evaluate human civilization. Dr. Kevin Walsh, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, suddenly stood up. He was a thin man in his 50s with graying hair and thick glasses similar to Amy's. He worked for SETI, the organization that searches for signs of extraterrestrial life. Your Honor, may I speak? Dr. Walsh asked. Judge Bennett looked annoyed. Dr. Walsh, you're here as a character witness for Miss Clark. You can speak during the appropriate time. This is the appropriate time, Dr. Walsh said urgently. Miss Clark contacted our organization 6 weeks ago with her findings. We dismissed her because she was a graduate student with no official credentials, but now I'm wondering if we made a mistake. What kind of mistake? D.A. Morgan asked. Dr. Walsh walked forward, looking embarrassed. She sent us detailed mathematical proof showing that certain radio signals we had classified as natural phenomena were actually structured communications. We thought she was another conspiracy theorist because she was so young and her theories seemed impossible. Amy looked at Dr. Walsh with a mixture of hope and frustration. I tried to tell you that the signals contained precise timing information. The beings sending them are following a schedule, and today is when they arrive. Judge Bennett was getting more irritated by the minute. Miss Clark, even if Dr. Walsh is reconsidering your theories, that still doesn't give you the right to hack into government computers. I didn't hack them to steal information, Amy said firmly. I hacked them to upload information. NASA's computers weren't prepared to receive the type of mathematical data the aliens are transmitting. I modified their systems so they could decode the incoming messages. You modified government property without permission, D.A. Morgan pointed out. Because time was running out, Amy replied. The aliens' countdown timer showed they would arrive at exactly 2:47 this afternoon. I've been trying for weeks to get someone in authority to listen, but everyone thinks I'm crazy because I'm young and I don't look like their idea of a scientist. Judge Bennett checked his watch. It was 2:45 p.m. Miss Clark, you said the lights in this building will flicker at 2:47 because of some electromagnetic pulse from an alien ship? Yes, Your Honor. The probe they're sending ahead of their main vessel will cause brief power fluctuations in electronic systems within a 50-mile radius. And you calculated this from your alien mathematics? Yes, sir. The pulse will last exactly 3 seconds and won't cause any permanent damage. It's just a side effect of their propulsion system. Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair. Well, Miss Clark, we have 2 minutes to see if you're a brilliant scientist or completely insane. The entire courtroom waited in tense silence. Some people checked their phones for the time. Others whispered quietly to each other. Amy stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, staring at the large clock on the wall. At exactly 2:46, Amy said, 30 seconds. Judge Bennett found himself holding his breath despite his skepticism. The second hand on the courtroom clock moved slowly toward the 12. 10 seconds, Amy said softly. Everyone in the room was now watching the clock. Even D.A. Morgan had stopped, shuffling her papers. At exactly 2:47, the lights in the courtroom flickered once, twice, 3 times, then returned to normal. The air conditioning unit made a strange humming sound for a moment, then resumed its normal operation. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Bennett stared at Amy with his mouth open. How did you know that would happen? Because the alien probe just entered Earth's atmosphere, Amy said calmly. If you look out the window facing east, you should be able to see it in about 30 seconds. Dr. Walsh rushed to the tall windows on the east side of the courtroom. Other people followed him, including the bailiff and several jurors. Judge Bennett stayed in his seat, but he was staring at Amy like he had never seen her before. Oh my God, Dr. Walsh whispered. What is it? Judge Bennett demanded. There's something in the sky, Dr. Walsh said, his voice shaking. It's silver, cylindrical, about the size of a commercial airplane, and it's just hanging there motionless. D.A. Morgan joined the crowd at the windows. I can see it too. It's definitely not any aircraft I've ever seen. Judge Bennett finally stood up and walked to the windows. In the clear afternoon sky, a metallic object hung suspended about a mile above the city. It wasn't moving, wasn't making any sound, and didn't look like anything built on Earth. Miss Clark, Judge Bennett said without turning away from the window, what exactly is that thing? It's a communication probe, Amy replied. The main alien vessel is still outside our solar system, but they sent this probe ahead to establish contact. Based on my calculations, they'll be monitoring our response to determine whether human civilization is ready for formal first contact. Judge Bennett slowly walked back to his bench, his legs feeling weak. Everything he thought he knew about the world had just changed in the span of 5 minutes. "Dr. Walsh," he said, "in your professional opinion, is Miss Clark telling the truth?" "Doctor." Walsh was still staring out the window at the alien probe. "Your Honor, I've spent my entire career looking for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. If Miss Clark predicted this event accurately, then she knows something the rest of us don't." Amy opened her folder and pulled out several sheets covered with complex equations. "Your Honor, the aliens aren't just here for a visit. According to their mathematical communications, Earth is undergoing what they call a cognitive assessment trial. They're testing whether human civilization is intelligent enough to join their galactic community. And what happens if we fail this test?" Judge Bennett asked quietly. Amy looked directly at him, her expression completely serious. "Based on the mathematical patterns, I believe civilizations that fail the test are quarantined from the rest of the galaxy permanently." Judge Bennett sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly understanding that the young woman he had been mocking might be humanity's only hope for survival. Within 1 hour of the alien probe's appearance, the federal courthouse became the center of the biggest crisis in human history. News helicopters circled overhead while military vehicles surrounded the building. Amy still stood in the same courtroom, but now she was surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the country. General Patricia Stone from the Pentagon sat at the prosecutor's table, her uniform crisp and her expression deadly serious. Next to her was Dr. Marcus Webb, NASA's top scientist, frantically typing on his laptop. Professor Helen Torres from MIT had flown in on a military jet and was studying Amy's mathematical equations with intense focus. Judge Bennett remained on his bench, but he no longer looked like the man in charge. He watched Amy explain complex alien mathematics to government officials and realized how foolish he had been to mock her intelligence. "Miss Clark," General Stone said, "we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. You said this is some kind of test?" Amy nodded, pointing to her calculations spread across the defense table. "The alien communications call it a cognitive assessment trial. From what I can translate, they do this with every developing civilization they encounter." "What kind of assessment?" Dr. Webb asked, looking up from his laptop. "They measure a species' collective intelligence and problem-solving abilities. The test isn't about military strength or advanced technology. It's about whether a civilization can work together to solve complex problems under pressure." Professor Torres studied one of Amy's equations closely. "These mathematical structures are unlike anything I've seen before. How did you learn to understand them?" "I didn't learn them," Amy replied. "I developed new computational methods to bridge the gap between human mathematics and their multidimensional thinking. It took me 3 months of constant work." General Stone leaned forward. "What exactly do we need to do to pass this test?" Amy pulled out a thick notebook filled with her translations. "The aliens have sent down a series of mathematical and logical puzzles. We have 72 hours to solve them, starting from when their probe arrived. That gives us until Thursday afternoon." "And if we fail?" Judge Bennett asked quietly. Amy's expression grew serious. "Based on the patterns in their communications, civilizations that fail the test are isolated from the galactic community. They're essentially quarantined on their home planet permanently." Dr. Webb closed his laptop and stared at Amy. "You're telling us that a 22-year-old graduate student is humanity's only hope for joining an alien civilization?" "I'm not humanity's only hope," Amy said firmly. "But I might be the only person who can understand their language well, enough to communicate with them." General Stone stood up and began pacing. "Miss Clark, the President of the United States wants to speak with you in 1 hour. Every world leader is demanding answers. How do we handle this situation?" Amy looked around the room at all the powerful people hanging on her every word. 6 hours ago, she had been a defendant facing prison time. Now she was being asked to save human civilization. "First, we need to assemble a team of the world's best problem solvers," Amy said. "But not just traditional scientists and mathematicians. The alien puzzles require different types of thinking." "What do you mean?" Professor Torres asked. Amy walked to the blackboard that had been brought into the courtroom. She began writing equations that looked nothing like normal mathematics. Human beings solve problems in many different ways. Some people are great at logical reasoning. Others excel at pattern recognition. Some have intuitive insights that can't be explained rationally. You're talking about bringing together different types of intelligence, Dr. Webb said, understanding, dawning in his voice. Exactly. The aliens aren't just testing whether we're smart. They're testing whether we can overcome our prejudices and social barriers to use all of our collective intelligence. Judge Bennett felt a stab of guilt as he remembered his treatment of Amy earlier that day. You mean like how I dismissed you because of your age and appearance? Amy looked at him without anger. Yes, Your Honor. Human society often overlooks brilliant minds because they don't fit our expectations of what intelligence looks like. General Stone stopped pacing. What kind of people do you need for this team? Amy consulted her notebook. I need mathematicians who think outside conventional frameworks, computer programmers who can see patterns others miss, people who have been solving complex problems in unconventional ways. Where do we find these people? Professor Torres asked. They're everywhere, Amy replied. Some of them are in universities, but many aren't. They're working in garages, writing code for video games, solving puzzles for fun, or developing theories that mainstream science has rejected. Dr. Webb looked skeptical. You want to risk humanity's future on amateur scientists and hobbyists? Amy turned to face him directly. Dr. Webb, with respect, your mainstream scientific community dismissed me as an amateur. If Dr. Walsh and his colleagues at SETI had listened to me 6 weeks ago, we would have been much better prepared for this moment. Dr. Walsh, who had been quietly sitting in the gallery, spoke up. She's right. We get hundreds of communications from people claiming to have found alien signals. We automatically dismiss most of them based on the sender's credentials rather than examining the actual evidence. So what do you propose? General Stone asked Amy. Amy walked back to her equations on the blackboard. We put out a global call for problem solvers. We don't care about their degrees, their age, their background, or whether they fit our idea of what a scientist should look like. We give them the alien puzzles and see who can contribute. Judge Bennett realized what Amy was really saying. You want to democratize the most important test in human history. I want to give humanity its best chance to pass, Amy corrected. The aliens designed these puzzles to test our collective intelligence. That means we need to use every brilliant mind we have, not just the ones that look good on paper. Professor Torres studied Amy's blackboard equations more closely. These mathematical structures suggest the aliens think in ways that are completely foreign to traditional human logic. We might need people who think differently just to understand the problems. Exactly, Amy said. The first puzzle they sent requires understanding 17-dimensional geometric relationships. The second one involves probability calculations that assume multiple parallel realities. The third one is about pattern recognition across time loops. General Stone shook her head. I don't even understand what those words mean together. That's why we need a diverse team, Amy explained. Each puzzle requires different cognitive approaches. Some people will excel at geometric visualization. Others will be better at probability math. Still others might see patterns that none of us recognize. Dr. Webb looked at his watch. We have 67 hours left. How quickly can we assemble this team? Amy smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom that morning. If we use the internet effectively, we can have people working on these puzzles within hours. The challenge won't be finding brilliant minds. The challenge will be recognizing them when we see them. Judge Bennett stood up from his bench. Miss Clark, what do you need from me? Amy looked at him with surprise. Your Honor? I spent this morning mocking your intelligence because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. Now I want to help fix that mistake. What can I do? Amy considered his question carefully. Use your authority to make sure every person who submits a solution gets fair consideration, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Help us create a system where ideas are judged on their merit, not on the reputation of the person presenting them. Judge Bennett nodded solemnly. Consider it done. As Amy prepared to leave the courthouse to meet with the president, she realized that humanity's greatest test wasn't just about solving alien puzzles. It was about whether they could evolve beyond their own limitations and prejudices to become worthy of joining a larger galactic community. By Thursday morning, the federal courthouse had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between mission control and a technology convention. Dozens of computer screens covered every available wall space, and cables ran across the floor like electronic snakes. Amy sat at the center of it all, her old laptop connected to a massive network of computers from around the world. The team that had assembled over the past 48 hours was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. In one corner, 16-year-old Jake Morrison worked furiously on a quantum algorithm. He had dropped out of high school 2 years earlier when his teachers couldn't keep up with his mathematical abilities. Now he was developing computational methods from his mother's garage that were helping solve alien puzzles. At another workstation, 70-year-old Carol Davis pored over dimensional mathematics equations that covered 3 whiteboards. She had been a professor at Princeton 30 years ago, but her theories about multidimensional space had been so far ahead of their time that other scientists had ridiculed her work. She had retired in frustration, but Amy had tracked her down and convinced her to help save humanity. Near the windows, Danny Kim was explaining advanced physics concepts to a group of NASA scientists. Most people knew him as the night janitor at MIT, but what they didn't know was that he had been secretly solving the complex equations that professors left on their blackboards. He had taught himself advanced mathematics while emptying trash cans and mopping floors. Judge Bennett moved between the workstations carrying coffee and sandwiches. He had completely abandoned his judicial robes and was wearing a simple shirt and tie. Every few minutes he stopped to listen as someone explained their approach to solving one of the alien puzzles. He understood very little of the technical details, but he was fascinated by the diversity of thinking styles on display. "Amy," called out Dr. Webb from across the room, "we're getting solutions from teams in Tokyo, London, and Sao Paulo. The pattern recognition group in Mumbai just cracked the third-dimensional matrix." Amy looked up from her laptop where she was translating new alien communications. "Excellent. Are their solutions compatible with the geometric framework that the teenagers in Stockholm developed?" "They're checking that now," Dr. Webb replied. "It's amazing how quickly people are collaborating across different time zones and languages." General Stone approached Amy's workstation. She had been coordinating with military leaders around the world, but she was constantly amazed by the civilian response to the crisis. "Ms. Clark, we've received over 50,000 puzzle solutions from people in 87 countries. How do we evaluate them all?" Amy smiled tiredly. She had been awake for almost 60 hours straight. "We don't evaluate them based on who sent them. We feed them into the verification algorithm that Jake developed. If a solution works mathematically, it doesn't matter whether it came from a Nobel Prize winner or a 12-year-old kid in rural Kansas." "Speaking of which," Judge Bennett said, walking over with a fresh cup of coffee for Amy, "we just got a brilliant solution to the probability cascade from a group of 8th-grade students in Nebraska. Their teacher said they treated it like a video game puzzle." Professor Torres looked up from her calculations. "That makes sense. Many video games require exactly the kind of multi-layered thinking that these alien puzzles demand. Children who grew up with complex games might actually have an advantage." Carol Davis wheeled her chair over to join the conversation. Her white hair was messy from running her hands through it, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "I've been working on dimensional mathematics for 40 years, and I've learned more in the past 2 days than I did in the previous decade. These young people think about mathematical relationships in ways I never considered." Danny Kim approached the group, holding a printout covered in equations. "Amy, I think I found something important in the 4th puzzle. It's not just about solving the mathematical problem. There's a hidden layer that seems to be testing our moral reasoning." Amy took the printout and studied it carefully. "What do you mean?" "Look at these probability calculations," Danny explained. "The puzzle gives us a scenario where solving the problem correctly requires making a choice that could potentially harm another developing civilization somewhere else in the galaxy." Dr. Webb frowned. "You think the aliens are testing our ethics, not just our intelligence?" Amy stared at the equations, her mind racing. "That would make sense. If they're evaluating whether to let us join a galactic community, they would want to know what kind of neighbors we'd be." Jake Morrison looked up from his computer screen. "I've been analyzing the mathematical structure of all 5 puzzles. and they're designed to test different aspects of intelligence: logic, creativity, pattern recognition, collaborative problem solving, and moral reasoning. So it's not enough to be smart, Judge Bennett said slowly. We also have to prove we're good people. Amy nodded. And we have to prove we can work together despite our differences. Look around this room. 2 days ago, most of these people had never met each other. Many of them had been ignored or dismissed by mainstream society, but now they're collaborating to solve the most important problems in human history. Carol Davis smiled. It reminds me of something I learned as a young professor. The best mathematical insights often come from combining different perspectives. One person sees the logical structure, another sees the geometric relationships, and someone else recognizes a pattern that ties everything together. General Stone checked her watch. We have 18 hours left. How close are we to solving all 5 puzzles? Amy consulted her notes. We've made breakthrough progress on the first 3 puzzles thanks to contributions from teams around the world. The 4th puzzle, the one Danny identified as including moral reasoning, is more complex. We have multiple solution paths, but we need to choose the right approach. And the 5th puzzle? Professor Torres asked. Amy's expression grew serious. The 5th puzzle only appeared 6 hours ago. It's the most complex one yet, and it seems to require not just solving a problem but demonstrating something about human nature itself. Judge Bennett looked at the diverse group of people working throughout the courthouse. There were teenagers and senior citizens, professional scientists and self-taught geniuses, people from dozens of different countries and backgrounds, all focused on the same goal. What does the 5th puzzle ask us to demonstrate? He asked. Amy pulled up the alien communication on her laptop screen. The symbols looked like a combination of mathematics and abstract art. Based on my translation, they want us to show that humanity can evolve, that we can recognize our mistakes, learn from them, and become better than we were before. Jake Morrison stopped typing and looked around the room. You mean like how Judge Bennett went from mocking your intelligence to helping coordinate the most important scientific collaboration in history? Judge Bennett felt his cheeks redden, but Amy smiled at him kindly. Exactly like that. The aliens aren't just testing whether we're smart enough to join their community. They're testing whether we're capable of growth and change. Carol Davis nodded thoughtfully. And whether we can overcome our prejudices to recognize wisdom wherever it comes from. Danny Kim gestured toward all the computer screens showing work from people around the world. I think we're already demonstrating that. 48 hours ago, most of these brilliant minds were being overlooked or ignored. Now they're leading humanity's response to first contact. Amy looked at the countdown timer on her laptop. 17 hours and 32 minutes remained. The question is whether we can solve the final puzzle in time to prove that this transformation is real and permanent. As she spoke, new solutions began appearing on screens around the room from collaborators in Australia, South Africa, and Chile. Humanity's collective intelligence was awakening, and Amy couldn't help but feel hopeful about their chances of passing the alien test. With 12 hours remaining on the countdown timer, the courthouse had fallen into an anxious silence. Amy stared at her laptop screen, where the 5th and final alien puzzle displayed symbols that seemed to shift and change as she watched them. Unlike the previous puzzles, this one felt different. It felt personal. Jake Morrison had been working on the mathematical structure for 6 hours straight. His young face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes remained focused. Amy, I figured out what makes this puzzle different from the others. Amy looked up from her translations. Around the room, the diverse team of problem solvers had gathered to hear Jake's analysis. Carol Davis rolled her wheelchair closer, while Danny Kim stopped cleaning his glasses and listened intently. The first 4 puzzles tested specific abilities, Jake explained, pointing to equations on his whiteboard. Logic, creativity, pattern recognition, and moral reasoning. But this final puzzle doesn't have a mathematical solution. What do you mean? General Stone asked from across the room. Jake turned to face the group. The puzzle presents us with a scenario. There's another developing civilization in a distant galaxy that's also being tested by the aliens. If we solve our test correctly, we get invited to join the galactic community, but our success somehow interferes with their test and they fail. Dr. Webb frowned. So we have to choose between saving ourselves and saving another species? Amy finished translating another section of the alien message. Not exactly. The scenario is hypothetical. It's not really happening. But the aliens are watching how we respond to the moral dilemma. Professor Torres studied the symbols on Amy's screen. So they're testing our character, not our intelligence. Both, Amy replied. They want to see if we can recognize that this is an ethical test and how we choose to respond when faced with a difficult moral choice. Judge Bennett had been listening quietly from the corner where he was organizing food for the team. Now he walked forward, his expression thoughtful. In my courtroom, I see people make moral choices every day. Usually the right choice is obvious, when you step back and look at the bigger picture. Carol Davis nodded. But what if there is no right choice? What if both options lead to suffering? Danny Kim held up a page covered with his handwriting. I've been analyzing the ethical framework, embedded in all 5 puzzles. The aliens aren't looking for a specific answer. They're looking for our reasoning process. Amy felt a chill as she realized what Danny meant. They want to know what kind of people we are. If we join their galactic community, how will we treat other civilizations? Will we sacrifice others to benefit ourselves? Jake Morrison walked to the window and looked up at the alien probe still hanging motionless in the sky. So what do we tell them? Amy closed her laptop and stood up. She looked around the room at the extraordinary group of people who had come together to save humanity. 2 days ago, most of them had been ignored or dismissed by society. Now they were making the most important decision in human history. We tell them the truth, Amy said simply. Which truth? General Stone asked. Amy walked to the center of the room where everyone could see her. That 48 hours ago, humanity was failing this test before it even began. We were ignoring brilliant minds because they didn't fit our expectations. We were letting prejudice blind us to intelligence and wisdom. Judge Bennett felt the weight of her words. Like how I treated you in this very courtroom. Exactly, Amy continued. But we've also shown that we can change. We can recognize our mistakes and do better. Look at this room. Look at the global collaboration happening right now. People from every continent working together, sharing ideas, learning from each other. Carol Davis smiled. You're saying our transformation is the answer to their test. Amy nodded. The aliens designed these puzzles to force us to evolve. They wanted to see if we could overcome our limitations and prejudices to become worthy of joining a larger community. Dr. Webb looked skeptical. But what about the moral dilemma in the final puzzle? How do we respond to the scenario about the other civilization? Amy sat down at her laptop and began typing her response to the alien probe. We refuse to accept the premise of the question. What do you mean? Professor Torres asked. Amy's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she translated her thoughts into alien mathematics. We tell them that we won't accept a solution that requires another species to fail. Instead, we propose working together to find an alternative that protects both civilizations. Jake Morrison's eyes widened with understanding. You're rejecting the either-or choice and suggesting a collaborative solution. Even if it means taking on additional risks and responsibilities, Amy added. We're telling them that if we join their galactic community, we want to be the kind of species that helps others succeed, not one that succeeds at others' expense. Danny Kim grinned. That's brilliant. You're showing them that our moral reasoning includes a commitment to cooperation and mutual aid. General Stone looked worried. But what if that's not the answer they're looking for? What if they expect us to choose our own survival? Amy paused in her typing and looked up at the general. Then we fail the test. But we fail it honestly. We show them who we really are, not who we think they want us to be. Judge Bennett walked over to Amy's workstation. Miss Clark, 2 days ago I would have called you naive for suggesting that approach, but watching how this team came together, seeing how people from all over the world have collaborated to solve these puzzles, I think you're right. Amy smiled at him. Your Honor, 2 days ago, you wouldn't have been wrong to call me naive. But we've all learned something about human potential in the past 48 hours. Carol Davis wheeled her chair closer to the group. We've learned that our diversity is our strength. Different perspectives, different ways of thinking, different backgrounds and experiences. All of it contributes to our collective intelligence. Amy finished typing her response and looked around the room one more time. Are we all in agreement? Do we send this response? Every person in the room nodded. Jake Morrison, the teenager who had been dismissed by his teachers. Carol Davis, the professor whose theories had been ridiculed. Danny Kim, the janitor who had been invisible to the academic world. Judge Bennett, who had learned to see beyond his own prejudices. All of them, together with thousands of contributors around the world, were making this choice. Amy pressed the enter key, sending humanity's response to the alien probe. Her message was simple but profound. Humanity refused to succeed at another species' expense, and they were committed to finding collaborative solutions that benefited everyone. The alien probe in the sky began to glow with a soft blue light. New symbols appeared on Amy's screen, but these were different from anything they had seen before. They looked almost like music written in mathematical form. What does it say? Judge Bennett asked quietly. Amy studied the symbols, her heart pounding, as she began to understand their meaning. I think they're pleased with our answer. As the blue light from the probe grew brighter, filling the courthouse with an otherworldly glow, Amy realized that humanity had passed more than just an intelligence test. They had passed a test of character, and in doing so, they had discovered something important about themselves. The blue light from the alien probe grew brighter until it filled every corner of the courthouse. Amy watched her laptop screen as new symbols appeared, flowing across the display like liquid mathematics. For the first time in 3 months, she was seeing alien communications that felt warm and welcoming instead of cold and analytical. They're responding, Amy said, her voice filled with wonder. The mathematical patterns are completely different now. They're not testing us anymore. They're celebrating. Jake Morrison looked up from his workstation where he had been monitoring global communications. Amy, we're getting reports from around the world. Every major observatory is detecting new signals from space. Lots of them. Dr. Webb rushed to the windows facing east. The single silver probe was no longer alone in the sky. Dozens of similar objects had appeared, arranged in a perfect geometric pattern above the city. There are more ships arriving. Amy continued translating the new alien messages, her excitement growing with each symbol. They're introducing themselves. They call themselves the Collective of Evolved Minds. It's a federation of species that have passed similar tests throughout galactic history. General Stone approached Amy's workstation, her military bearing relaxed for the first time in days. What are they telling us? Amy scrolled through the mathematical communications, her eyes wide with amazement. They're explaining that humanity's response exceeded their expectations. Most species choose self-preservation when faced with the final ethical test. We're one of the few that chose cooperation over survival. Carol Davis wheeled her chair closer, her wrinkled face bright with curiosity. What happens now? They're offering us membership in their collective, Amy replied. Not just trade agreements or limited contact. Full membership with access to their accumulated knowledge and technology. Judge Bennett, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, walked forward. And what do they expect from us in return? Amy found the relevant section of the alien message. They want us to help evaluate and guide other developing civilizations, to be mentors for species that are going through their own cognitive assessment trials. Danny Kim looked up from the equations he had been working on. So humanity goes from being tested to being testers? More than that, Amy explained. We become part of a galactic community dedicated to helping civilizations evolve and grow. Our experience with overcoming prejudice and recognizing overlooked intelligence makes us valuable contributors. Dr. Webb returned from the windows, his face filled with awe. The ships are arranging themselves into some kind of communication array. I think they're preparing for a larger contact event. Amy's laptop chimed with an incoming message that was different from all the others. This one included visual elements, alongside the mathematical symbols. They're sending us images, pictures of their worlds, their civilizations, their technologies. The team gathered around Amy's laptop as she displayed the alien images on the large monitors throughout the room. They saw cities that floated in the clouds of gas giant planets, space stations that rotated around binary stars, and beings that looked nothing like humans, but moved with obvious intelligence and purpose. There are so many different species, Professor Torres whispered. Hundreds of them all working together. Amy translated more of the message. Each species contributes something unique to the collective. Some excel at engineering, others at art or philosophy or mathematical innovation. They're telling us that humanity's contribution will be our ability to recognize and develop potential in unexpected places. Judge Bennett felt a deep sense of irony. You mean they value us for the very thing I almost prevented from happening? Amy looked at him with understanding rather than accusation. Your Honor, what happened in this courtroom 2 days ago is exactly why they want us in their collective. You demonstrated humanity's capacity for growth and change. That's rarer in the galaxy than you might think. Jake Morrison had been monitoring communications from around the world. Amy, governments everywhere are asking what happens next. The President wants to know if you'll serve as Earth's first ambassador to the alien collective. Amy considered the enormous responsibility. 3 days ago, she had been a graduate student working alone on her thesis. Now she was being asked to represent all of humanity in galactic politics. I'll do it, she said finally. But only if we establish the same principles here that we used to solve the alien test. No more dismissing people because of their age, background, or unconventional ideas. If I'm going to represent humanity, I want to represent all of humanity's potential. General Stone nodded approvingly. The military is already implementing new recruitment protocols based on what we learned during this crisis. We're looking for problem solvers and creative thinkers, not just people who fit traditional molds. Carol Davis smiled with satisfaction. And universities around the world are reconsidering how they evaluate intelligence and potential. Your friend Jake here has been offered full scholarships to 12 different institutions. Jake blushed. I'm not sure I want to go back to traditional education. I've learned more in the past 3 days than I did in years of regular school. Amy looked around the room at the extraordinary team that had saved humanity. Maybe we don't need to go back to the old ways of doing things. Maybe this is our chance to build something better. Danny Kim held up a printout of new alien communications. Speaking of building something better, they're offering to share advanced technologies with us. Clean energy, faster than light communication, medical treatments that can extend human life by centuries. But they're also warning us, Amy added, reading more of the message. Advanced technology without wisdom and ethical development can destroy a civilization. They want to make sure we continue growing morally as well as intellectually. Judge Bennett understood the implication. They're going to keep testing us, even after we join their collective. Not testing, Amy corrected. Mentoring. They want to help us become the best version of ourselves, and eventually they want us to help other species do the same thing. 6 months later, Amy stood before the United Nations General Assembly, no longer the nervous young woman who had been mocked in a federal courtroom. She wore a translator device that allowed her to communicate directly with alien representatives, who attended the session via quantum communication link. Today, I'm proud to present humanity's first contribution to galactic science, Amy announced to the Assembly. A breakthrough in dimensional mathematics that will help us explore regions of space that were previously unreachable. In the gallery, Judge Bennett watched with pride as Amy explained complex scientific concepts to world leaders who hung on her every word. He had resigned from the bench to establish the Global Genius Initiative, a foundation that identified and supported brilliant minds regardless of their background or conventional credentials. Jake Morrison, now leading a team of young mathematicians from around the world, had developed the computational frameworks that made Amy's breakthrough possible. Carol Davis, her theories finally vindicated, was working with alien scientists to expand human understanding of multidimensional physics. Danny Kim had become the director of MIT's new Department of Practical Problem Solving. As Amy concluded her presentation, she caught Judge Bennett's eye in the gallery. He smiled and nodded, remembering the lesson he had learned in his own courtroom. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't any individual genius, but their ability to evolve, learn from their mistakes, and recognize that wisdom could come from the most unexpected places. The aliens hadn't just tested humanity's intelligence, they had revealed humanity's capacity for growth, redemption, and transformation. And in passing that test, humanity had earned not just membership in a galactic community, but the chance to help other species discover their own potential among the stars.